Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, are you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans? It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. David Hoffer, introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Hoffer. I'm the author of a novel, sci-fi first contact novel called Melody. And I'm really happy to be here. And I really thank JR for doing a great service to the readers and the authors by hosting this podcast. I really enjoy it. Podcast, YouTube, whatever medium you guys are using.
Well, we appreciate you coming on because, finding new people is always good. And so the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we found them. And so this one came from friend of the show, Edward Handley. I understand you and he are in a writing accountability group that you guys meet once a week.
Yeah, we've been meeting once a week for 8 years, and Ed is the newest member. And we met him through Steve, who was your other guest a few episodes ago. And he turned me on to you, and I was happy to come here and looking forward to the conversation.
So do you guys meet in person, or is it an online check-in?
Pre-COVID, it was in person. So I'm in the San Diego area. We all used to get together at a lady's Ruth's house. We'd have a little wine. We'd have some chips. And we'd essentially all submit and read and critique our work. But with COVID, now we are virtual. And so now we've got authors from, we got one from Washington, one from Utah, one from Chicago, one from Philadelphia. So we're only virtual, but we meet every week, and people essentially, it's just kind of a feedback loop. And we got some pretty accomplished people on there, and just give each other advice from both the reader and the author perspective to make our books the best they can be before we unload it on the world.
I do. I have a writing accountability group. Mine's mostly veterans in it, like military veterans as opposed to writing veterans. And so, yeah, those groups can be very helpful and a lot of fun. We do ours because we're all over the place globally. We do ours via Discord or Google Meets, but it is a lot of fun to be able to talk with people who understand, because you can get really passionate about the writing process, but if you talk to a normie, they're like, "You're boring me, go away."
No, I hear you. And having that feedback loop is so important, right? Before you put it in front of a reader. And when we got like 10 people to look at the book before the reader actually sees the published work. And that is so important. People to kind of bounce things off, make sure it's working for you.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're looking at throwing a little humor or situational, like, let's be creative. Sometimes what makes a lot of sense in your head and you explain it to someone else and they're like, I don't get it. And even if it's the most brilliant idea ever, if they don't understand it's brilliant, it does you no good.
Yeah. I just listened to Joanna Penn's episode. She's a podcaster.
Absolutely. She's got an awesome voice. I listen just because her accent's cool.
Oh, great, right? So her latest episode, she had some Hollywood guy who's fantastic. He just wrote a book. Anyways, he calls it The Touch of Madness, right? He just thinks that is critical to any creative pursuit. Anyways, there's a lot of madness that comes out in my book and a lot of madness that didn't make it into that book. And that writing group is very helpful to identify what works versus what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I always find fascinating. And I promise this isn't going to be a How to Be a Writer podcast, dear listener. We're going to stick to books, but some of the things like where people's bridge too far is like, Space Marines wouldn't talk like that. They'd cuss more. And I'm like, okay, so flying in space and fighting space dragons you were on board with, but a Marine that didn't cuss was a bridge too far. Got it. Like where people's lines are kind of is amusing to me.
Well, I understand that, right? What's the difference between a dragon in space versus, on Earth? So I get that.
Yeah, it's just, I think there was a movie about the Vietnam War called The Bright Shining Lie. And one of the overarching messages, this is basically a story of a warrior. What is a warrior after the war kind of thing? And he just didn't know how to readjust. This overarching theme of the movie. But one of his lines was that if you get the little things right, they'll believe the big lie. Mm-hmm. So you got to get the little details right so they will believe that big lie. And you see that some with like, okay, so if the Marines didn't cuss, now I can't believe your space dragons or whatever. Like you sell them on the little details that set that verisimilitude, and then they'll go with whatever the most outrageous claim that's the pivot of the novel.
Yeah, so, I hear you. That totally works on this reader. when I'm like aliens, right? They got that. I totally believe they're Marines in space.
Yeah, but why they would like mess with those eggs? I look at that maybe because I'm jaded because I watch horror movies, but I'm like, nope, turning around and going home. We don't need those.
They wouldn't have a movie.
Then you wouldn't have the movie. Just like the old joke about how much shorter Lord of the Rings would be if they had guns.
Guns, or why not just the Eagles taking a Mount Doom? Everybody
right. So it's always amazing. They've done the same thing about Harry Potter. If Harry had a gun, it would have been a lot shorter of those books. But yeah, it's always fascinating. The other thing that fascinates me is sometimes like reality. If you put something that's actually real, like, oh, that wouldn't really happen, and they won't believe it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's this historical incident. It actually happened, or like this happened to me. Like one of the things in my first novel was something that happened to me in Iraq, and I threw it in there. And my publisher was like, no one's going to believe this. And I'm like, no, it happened to me. I've got the mission statement from this incident. Like, I don't care. No one's going to believe it. Take it out. So it always amuses me how sometimes they'll believe the outrageous, but reality, when you sneak it in. I'll give you, for instance, we've talked about this in a couple episodes, but we're going to stay apolitical. But the war in Russia and Ukraine has been going on for 2 years now. So everyone's aware that it's happening. As the war has devolved or evolved, whatever you want to call it, they started using drones a lot more heavily. Even the U.S. military is starting to make drone operator more of a thing. Like they're talking about attaching that to infantry squads. Yeah. So the Russian military started putting grenades on their drones and flying over the trenches of the enemy and trying to drop the grenades. So the Ukrainian army said, well, I got to take those drones out of the sky. So then they put sticks, taped it to their drones, and we're trying to like joust the enemy drones out of the sky. So it's basically like lances, right? If I put that in a novel, nobody would believe it. That's so stupid. No one would ever do that. Yet it's happening right now.
That's amazing. And I want to read that.
It actually, what was it? The Army, we had the saying, if it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid.
Yeah, I'm on board. To write that novel, JR, I'm buying that.
The other one that's an instance is Yakuza in Japan started using drones to deliver their drugs so nobody would get caught holding. So the police started making drone capture drones that had like nets to drop over them to force them to the ground, like weighted nets. And then Yakuza's response was to make drones that hunted drones, and it just kind of went back and forth. And I'm like, oh, we're watching in small scale a Cold War arms race.
Right? Yeah. All heading towards Terminator, then it's no longer any fun.
This is how we get Skynet. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Although we knew that when like the incident where in California, believe it or not, I think Teslas are have that self-driving park mode.
Sure.
And a Tesla and one of the police robots ended up crashing into each other because neither one of them wanted to give. I'm like, robot on robot violence. This is how it starts. So speaking of writing, it's going to be weird. But speaking of writing, which is the reason we sort of went this direction, is you actually are a judge in a writing contest. So before we dive into your book and the nerd stuff, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that because obviously some of the people that listen are writers or want to be writers. And so knowing about these kinds of things, it's a win-win for everybody.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for serving that up. So I'm a judge for this contest. It's been going on for about 3-4 years. It's called the Self-Published Science Fiction Competition, and it's vspsfc.org. And they take 300 entries. We've got 30 judges and 10 teams, and it's totally free for the authors to submit. So if you're an author out there, absolutely submit. If you're a reader, there are so many jewels in the indie space that stand up perfectly well against any traditionally published book. And the reason this contest came about, and Hugh Howey, who's the author of Wool, of course, probably your folks all know that, he started this contest. And it's still going on. And the whole purpose of it is to really kind of bring light to some of these beautiful books that that a lot of people don't know about just because they don't have a traditionally published arm behind it. So I can mention a couple if you don't mind, JR, maybe just this last year. Great. So of those 300 books, I'm just going to mention 2. This one didn't win the contest, but it was my absolute favorite. So let me quickly make sure I got this right here before I throw it out. So the book is called Apocalypse Parenting, Book 1. and it's a lit RPG, and it is just a joy to read. She was a finalist in the contest. The author's name is Aaron Ampersand, and it was just so fun. It was about a mother with her kids, and all of a sudden, aliens take over the world somehow, and they put all of humanity in a video game. And it was just absolutely precious. So I would just highly recommend that book. It's just a fun read. And the winner of the contest was also really great. The book was called Kenai. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but it's Keani by Dave Dobson. And it is, if you remember, if you like ints from Loader, he didn't say this in the book, but they seem like ints to me. It's ints come to life on an alien planet. So it was just a really fun read. Just the prose in both those books was just fantastic, and I couldn't recommend them highly enough. So there's my pitch for those couple books. And if you're an author, check out that competition, because I think it's just a great way to amplify the indie author community.
Apocalypse Parenting sounds like, I don't know, the worst version of Fallout, but it sounds very interesting. Have you read it?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh yeah. As part of this contest, I probably read partially or in whole 50 of the 300 books.
Yikes.
And those are two books that really, really stood out to me as just being fantastic. And you can go to the website and you'll see the finalists for this year. All of them are solid books. I'd recommend it. And in the prior years too are just fantastic. And I'm not pitching myself. My book happened to be a finalist last year, and that's how come I'm a judge this year, is really to kind of give back to the community. And I'm a reader at heart. I'm a reader more than an author, and I just absolutely love the whole process of going through these books and shining a light on some of the great writing that these authors are putting out there.
So what is the requirement for submission? Do they have does it have to be their first novel, or can anyone at any stage enter?
Anyone at any stage can author. Typically, you want to do so if you're an author looking at it, we actually have that all documented on the website. You can look at it, but essentially it's a free-for-all. If you are sci-fi, so it does have general specific guidance. It needs to be sci-fi, and essentially any author can submit for free. You do have to be indie, so if you're trying to publish, Doubleday or whatever, you're not going to be qualified. But you can put it, and it needs to be a standalone book. It can still be like second or third in a series, but it needs to be a standalone series, in that world. And that's really, it needs to be professionally edited, professional cover. But other than that, everybody's welcome to submit.
Okay. And we will link to that in the show notes. So if you want to check it out, if that's your jam. I don't think I've written any standalone novels that weren't intended to have sequels. That would be difficult.
Right, but even if it's a sequel, that'd be okay, as long as you can kind of read it standalone, where it's not required to read the first book. So yeah, JR, if you've got sci-fi, I would absolutely recommend you submit it.
Yeah, so I've got this strange problem I probably should see a therapist about, but I've never met a short story I couldn't envision a 20-book arc for. And so when people are like, where do you get your ideas? I'm like, no. The question is, how do you turn them off so I can get the one done?
I hear you. And what a great way to figure out what's a good novel. Start writing short stories. That's great. And one thing, I'm just going to go back just a little bit. It's free for authors to do this too. Others contests, they charge money, and some of them are legit, some of them are not. But this one's totally free, totally legit, and a nice, transparent process.
Yeah, I don't know. I grew up on short stories. So my sisters did Girl Scouts, and they call you, if you're the siblings of the Girl Scouts, and you're not a member either as a young girl or if you're a boy, they call you tag-alongs, which is what the cookie was named for. And so I had to do that a lot with my older sister when she was involved in Girl Scouts, and before I was old enough to do Boy Scouts where I could be away. And when I was there, they had a lot of times where we were, there'd be like Reader's Digest books, where it's Reader's Digest. If you don't know, Youngins is where they would take classic stories and they would condense them down to the nutty gritty essentials, and they would basically, I don't want to say dumb it down, they would pare it down, intended for younger audiences. And so that's how I started reading. So like I read a lot of shorter content, so I'm pretty passionate about it. I know there's not a whole lot of money in short content, but I still love it. It's why if I break even on an anthology, I call it good. Yeah, I've published 10 of my own. So anthologies, and I've done more over there with Three Ravens under their banner. Because like I said, I'm just passionate about short content. It does not get enough love anymore.
I was going to say, I'm very interested in getting in that space, but that's like a whole different skill set, writing short stories versus a novel. So I'm looking forward to doing that myself.
Absolutely. And you've got to change the way you pace things because you don't have as much space. And so now it's like, I use it, if nothing else, to practice because I'm like Tolkien. I'd describe every blade of grass if you'd let me. So kind of figuring out if I'm going to describe it, it has to be important, kind of like that Chekhov's gun. If it's going to be on the mantle and you talk about it, it better be important later. Kind of thing. And so it's a good way to hone your skills, if nothing else. Especially if you need to learn to be more succinct. When I first started, I could never get a short story under 13,000. And now I turn them in. My goal is to always try to hit the bottom of the number so I could just like force myself to tell a compelling story in shorter words. Have you seen any of the microfiction or the, what do they call them? Micro shorts where like under 1,000 words, people are telling short stories?
No, that sounds pretty cool though. Flash fiction type stuff.
Flash fiction. I think that's what it's called. I've seen some of that and some of it's good, but I'm just like, I don't know how you do this. My brain cannot compute that.
Oh, I take that back. Yeah, we got an anthology local here called San Diego Writers Inc., which is kind of our local hub for writers. And yeah, they do a lot of. They have an annual anthology, and flash fiction is in there, poetry, and even chapters of books from novels. So sure, I actually was a reader for that too. So I read that type of stuff.
Is San Diego where you're at? Is that near Orange County?
Yeah, it's just south of Orange County, and I'm in a little community called Del Mar, which is a little bit north of San Diego, right on the coast.
I know one of the friends of the show, Jonathan Yanez, who's in Orange County, writes over there, and he mentioned there's even a lot of bookstores there that will exclusively, like not exclusively, but they're very friendly to indie authors, so they're like having their books out right next to the Trad Pub, and so he was telling me he goes there sometimes for events because they're really big on like community, which I like.
Well, Mysterious Galaxy is the big. There's a few indies here, but that's the one everybody's heard about. All the big authors go there, and they're very indie friendly too. They're cool. Fantastic independent bookstore.
That is awesome. So before we dive into the interview where we talk about your book that brought us here, we do have to ask you the religion question. It is required because we are the Blasters and Blades podcast. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Looking forward to it.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Trek, hands down. I mean, I grew up on Star Trek, and for people who are in my age group, I was watching Space 1999, Battlestar Galactica back in the old days, not the new Battlestar Galactica, when they had like these weird dog robots, and what was it? Lost in Space. I loved that stuff. When I was like 8 years old, I was watching that stuff, and I just loved it. But Star Wars, when that first movie came out, I probably went with my friend Mike to the theater here locally, and I probably watched that a dozen times, paying full price. So I absolutely love Star Wars, especially the first three movies that came out. And of course, I love Firefly. But when it comes, if I have to make one choice, it's Star Trek, hands down. I love it.
I'm kind of torn. I like some of the concepts of Star Wars, like what young man hasn't thought of how he would abuse the holodeck. If nothing else, like hero fantasy, like
that's the next generation. I don't think
No, it came in TNG. But I mean, I'm just thinking like I would fight all of the pirates and win every time. And then like, I mean, you'd be the superhero you always wanted to be as a little boy, right? Wrestle dinosaurs and whatnot. But the one thing that I had trouble with Star Trek was it just felt too utopian. Like I have trouble believing that humans would like exist in a world where money wasn't a thing. I mean, human nature is at some level very base and primal. We are not as far removed from our more Neanderthal days as we would like to think.
Yeah, I hear you. And this is old David talking rather than young David. I just loved it. But old David looks back at that. I love the kind of optimistic view of the future. And it occurred to me much later that the aliens, like the Romulans and all the ones that they were fighting, they were the humans.
Yes.
Yeah, you understand.
The other one that I liked as far as Star Trek goes is the I forget the name of the actor, but he's the one who did Quantum Leap. But the Enterprise.
Oh, yes, I love that. Yes.
I love that. that felt more realistic to me as they're trying to, I mean, the time travel thing got a little weird, but time travel always does. It's kind of a cheese factor that you just have to accept if you're going to read time travel. But other than that, like I really liked that story arc. I liked all of the characters. It felt real.
I 100% agree. All the spinoffs, that is my next favorite Star Trek series or spinoff or movie. Yeah, I wish I could remember the name. Bakula, is that his name? Scott Bakula?
Yeah, Scott Bakula. There we go. Yeah. The other one with Star Trek that I really liked, I wasn't a fan of Voyager. I mean, that felt like if you cut off some of those side trips, you could have made that series a lot shorter. Like you didn't need to get involved in all the things, right? But I do know some people loved Janeway as a captain, though. Like I haven't watched enough to form an opinion. I did love Deep Space Nine. Post 80s, there wasn't a lot of good representation of males that were fathers in media where they weren't the buffoon and the butt of all the jokes. And with Deep Space Nine, you did see like that officer was a dad and his son was just a human being. Like he didn't become Wesley Crusher where it's like you just wanted to punch him in the face. And he was just obviously like so annoying. They would have never put him back on the ship his mother and that he had grown up on. Like that's just not how the military works. They would have put him somewhere else. Needs of the plot, obviously. And then of course he was too perfect at everything. Whereas the son in Deep Space Nine was just human. Like he just felt like you could have met him on the street and be like, okay, yeah, I know that guy. And I like that representation.
Do you remember Babylon 5? Did you ever watch that?
I did. I hadn't watched it when it was out. I don't know how I missed it, but then we did an episode here where we discussed the IP, and I watched the first 5 episodes, and I realized, holy crap, I was only supposed to watch 2 and then like go to bed because the podcast is tomorrow. And I watched 5 hours straight because it was just so good, and I want to keep watching. It's just only so much time, and it sucks you in.
Yeah. You just you triggered that thought when you were talking about the kid on that Star Trek show. It seemed very real, right? It was just crazy how, kind of the environment was in, but it just seemed so legitimate. I absolutely love that series too.
Yeah, and it was made. I mean, like obviously, if you made it now, the special effects would be a lot better. But they did try to go with space realism, like physics in the laws of what we understand how they would work in space. Like they did factor that in. It was one of the few shows where you see space fights that isn't just World War II dogfights. Oh, by the way, space is the background, right? Like Star Wars is famous for that. And I love them. They're fun even. But, you don't need the bank if you're not in space, right? Like you're not.
I hear you. The real test is to go back to these shows after like 20 years, right? And see if they hold up. Star Trek still holds up. Star Wars still holds up. Firefly holds up. I'm afraid to say Star Trek Next Generation didn't hold up for me. Space 1999 didn't, but Babylon 5 held up for all the reasons you're talking about.
Space 1999 you could tell when it was made just by the way they envisioned the clothing. And for that reason alone, it gets an honorable mention for me. If you see the far out, I'm like, I don't know what they were smoking, but give Hollywood more of that because they could use a boost.
Well, I had a crush on the doctor. I don't know her name, but that was my boyhood crush.
So mine was Lucy Lawless, the Xena warrior princess.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. She's probably single-handedly the reason I like brunettes. And then I found out like she's naturally a blonde, and I'm like, what? My whole life was a lie.
Xena the warrior princess. I watched every episode of Xena the warrior princess.
And even her, like when she would fight, that's one of the things I liked. Is one of the things I hate is when the women are good at everything just because woman hear me war. I'm like, acknowledge biology. Like either are you familiar with the cult line God made man and Sam Colt made him equal?
Nope.
It's basically the idea as the Derringer was designed specifically for ladies. It was made to fit in the parasol, I think they call it, the little purse that they had in the late 1800s. And the idea was that the woman could now defend themselves against men that were bigger and stronger because she had the pistol. So God made man and woman. Sam Colt made them equal. You can push that forward. Spacesuits can be the great equalizer. If you're both in the same spacesuit, it doesn't matter that you're stronger than her if she's smarter than you, right? Because you can do that. So I like that Xena made a nod to that because she had her unique fighting style, which gave her a benefit. And, oh, by the way, the gods, magic.
Yeah.
I don't need a lot, but just acknowledge that there's differences so we can go forward and explain how you beat that, because that, to me, makes the story more compelling.
Oh, I heard the superheroes. I love the ones that are more like the early James Bond, right? Sean Connery got his
Yes,
ass. I just love that. Same thing with the Jedi, like the later Star Wars. They're superheroes. It's like I liked them when they were more kind of the original Star Wars, right? They had to kind of talk their way past checkpoints, and then you understand. It's just the
absolutely. Like
humanity.
it gives the story stakes, I think.
Yes, absolutely stakes. Yes.
And that's one of the things. Like some of the
Talking.
yeah, that's one of the things that I don't like about some of the mill sci-fi. And generally speaking, I love all of it, but if you send these people into harm's way and they do the things you're required to do in a war zone, means you fight, your friends die, you kill people, you risk death, and you come out at the end and it's rinse and repeat, new episode like it never happened, then either that guy's a sociopath, and if that's part of the story, more power to you, or you don't understand that stuff changes you.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that, like, that's why I said the stakes, because you see some people forgetting that sometimes in mill sci-fi, and those tend to be the stories that aren't very good because of it.
Have you read the series The Lost Fleet? I think by Campbell.
Yes. John Henry, he's going by Henry as his given name. He wrote as John Campbell, and now he's rebranding it all back to his given name. But yeah, I read all of those. I love them.
Same, right? Just absolutely. I think about mill sci-fi. That's where my head goes immediately.
And he kept the science belief. It's very obvious if you read that. I'm like, yep, this guy was definitely a line officer in the Navy.
Is that right? Because it seemed so legit when he's talking.
So the Navy breaks their officers into medical corps, lawyers, non-line officers, which are support, like your engineering officers, and then line officers is a designation that means they can command a ship at sea. And so that's what he did. So he's literally driven ships, like he's given the commands. And it was very obvious he understood how all that worked because it was all believable. I will say, if you read the series, because when I found it, the series was finished, the main series. He's done some spinoffs. I read it back to back, and I listened to the audiobook, and you could watch his writing improve throughout the process of all those books and his narrator at the same time. And it seems like some of it is repetitive if you listen to it back to back. But I will tell you, dear listener, that is because he's traditionally published, which means sometimes there's a year between publishing. So people are being reminded because they didn't just binge read the whole thing. But I love all of those books. They were well done.
Well, fair warning, listeners. When I started the first book, I couldn't stop. I had to read the entire series. So be prepared for a commitment.
And he definitely understood the role of logistics. I think Napoleon, what's the famous expression? Amateurs think tactics, professionals think logistics is the old line, because none of that matters. All the cool guns and space fights matter if you run out of bullets, or fuel.
You can tell he's got a military background because it just comes across as so legit. Just love that.
And one of the difficulty things in sci-fi is because you have this whiz-bang tech that generally powers your ship's engine, which is fine, but that means that idea that I'm going to run out of fuel becomes a non-issue. And then some of the stakes are gone. So I like that he has fuel cores that can be expended. And if you do too much on them, you drain them faster. So you have to either replace the fuel core. Another way around that, because we've got subs that could stay out for years with the nuclear powered subs, but you run out of food and supplies. And so you still have to eventually surface for that, if no other reason. I like those limitations because it just feels more real.
Damn, JR, I'm very impressed with your memory. I just remember I love the book. You know the details about the energy cores.
I've talked to the author. We've done an interview. I'm kind of a fan, and we have some things in common. Like, I don't know if he's talking about it personally, so we'll leave it off air. But so he's a really nice guy. I like him. He goes out of his way to reach down and help out new authors that are doing mill sci-fi.
God, I love that.
He's shouted out some of the newer books from people I wouldn't have heard of otherwise. Like I like the people that pay it forward because what's that expression? We stand on the shoulders of giants. So the idea that you did it yourself. So I really like it.
Great to hear. I didn't know that about that author. That just makes me love the book.
He's a genuinely decent dude. I really like him. That's fantastic. All right. Because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
I'm going to go with Game of Thrones, but I'm going to admit, after I read that first book, when something happened to Stark, if you haven't read that book, I won't tell you, I threw the book across the room and swore I was never to read another book from J.R.R. Martin.
I've heard that a lot.
And I subsequently, like 2 weeks later, read them one after another. So he is anyways, everybody knows about Game of Thrones. Everybody's seen it on HBO probably. Wonderful book. So much deeper, detailed, nuanced. The characters are just even more compelling than they are on the screen. And you don't have that disaster of a finale. I think it's on HBO. So Game of Thrones for me.
I like the concept of the books, but I'm not really a fan of grimdark. Like, I don't mind a dark setting if there's hope at the end, but I don't want the light at the end of the tunnel being the train that's about to run you over. I would prefer to know that there's a better future, even if it's not quite there yet. To me, I need that hope. The world is dark enough as it is. I want a little bit of light.
No, I hear you, right? And I kept reading it, thinking that light was hope, and I'm still hoping in book 5 or book 6, if you ever finish it, we'll see something. No, that's totally legitimate. Like I said, I threw the book across the room. I totally understand if people don't want to pick up the next book.
Yeah, I tried Joe Abercrombie, and for the same reason, the grimdark just didn't speak to me. Although, counter to the grimdark movement, people have come up with, they've tagged it Noble Bright. And the idea is it's all hopeful. That is the requirement. So grimdark, it's grim and dark. Noble Bright is the opposite. It's a hopeful fiction, which is not to say people don't have their trials and tribulations, but again, there's that hope that at the end things can be better. And that's just more my style.
Can I share another kind of random book recommendation on the hope subject? I just read a book. I don't even know how I heard Legends and Lattes. Have you heard about that book?
No, but it sounds interesting because I'm a coffee lover.
So if you're a coffee lover, Legends and Lattes, and I don't have the author's name. It's in a high fantasy world, in like but it's this orc fighter who basically is just sick of it, and she wants to go set up a coffee shop, and it is the most delightful.
Oh, that's Gamelit, isn't it?
Oh, it's what?
It's Gamelit, right?
It is not.
I think I've heard of that.
I don't think I'd call it Gamelit, or if you're talking about lit RPG. So I'm not sure how. Maybe it is. It's just a wonderful book.
I know Gamelit and lit RPG have a lot of overlap. I'm told the difference is how crunchy it is. I've heard of that in context with some of the lit RPG Gamelit authors that we've interviewed. So I don't know, but yeah, if it's what I think it is very good. I haven't read it, but I mean, it's been highly recommended.
Just on the hope, just a delightful, right? All the tropes of
So that's a big thing in the Gamelit lit RPG is the slice of life style, where the stakes are just a lot less. Like, it's all more low key. Like, they go on adventures, but mostly they go back to the village and they tend their bar or run a massage parlor or whatever.
I'm looking that up. That sounds like a genre I would enjoy.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't checked the books out, but I like the concept of it's a lot more low key. I found lately that I've been reading what I call like the summer beach read bubblegum type fiction, where it's like you don't have to take it too seriously. Like, I liked Dune, but I can't read that nonstop. Sometimes my brain just wants a break.
It's funny you say that. I literally have it right in front of me. I'm rereading every Dune book, just not because of the movie. I reread every Dune book every couple of years, and I'm a big fan of the original, the Frank Herbert versions of Dune. So, but I hear you. It's a little thick.
Well, I mean, with my head injury, like I can only push so far before it gets in the way of the writing. So for me, I get entertained by the lighter stuff, and it doesn't interfere with my ability to write. So it's kind of a balance for me. It's also why I do audiobooks mostly exclusively. It's for the same reason.
Sure. Did you like the movies, the Dune movies?
I have not seen the new ones. I watched the original, and I enjoyed those. It's been years. I'm not sure how it hold up because I haven't watched it recently. Although I will say, when you mention, what holds up, when you mentioned Lost in Space, I've watched the original series, all of the episodes. I watched the remake. They did a movie in like the late 90s, early aughts. Awesome movie. It held up. I've watched it again recently. And then I watched was it Netflix or Prime that put the Lost in Space series out?
I think it's Prime. Yeah, I got through some of that. I didn't get through all of it.
I think the Battlestar Galactica remake and the Lost in Space remakes are an example where you change the existing characters in a way where it didn't feel like you were checking the box. It felt like it made the story better. So when they made the doctor a female, but she was also slightly crazy and like daddy issues, that worked in the context of the evil she was doing. and they took that character who was supposed to be evil, but it was like the Diet Coke of evil, and they turned her up the psychosis up, a level, and it really worked, like emphasizing what the character was supposed to be. And then they did the same thing with Starbuck. I like how they changed her. I know that's heresy to some, but the way they did it, her tie to the Adama clan, it worked for me. Like,
you're talking about the later Battlestar Galactica, right?
Yeah. So in the later Battlestar Galactica, I don't know if you watched it.
Oh, I watched it.
Yeah, the fact they made her a female, and her tie to the family was she was dating the younger brother or the youngest son, and she was his training pilot, and he wasn't good enough, but because of daddy, he had to pass even if he wasn't going to be a flight officer. So she passed him anyway, and then he crashed and died because she certified he was ready when he wasn't. So there's the guilt angle that explains the angst, but also links her to the family in a way that just worked for me, where it didn't feel like I'm just checking a box.
I want to watch that whole series again because I just loved that the remake of the Battlestar. I loved them both, but the remake just was fantastic.
So, do you like the concept of the ancient archaic battleship being brought back to life? That trope?
Oh my god, yeah, that was the hook, right? I just thought that was fantastic.
That's big in anime, but Terry Mixon and Jay and Shaney did the last Hunter series where they did that as well. If you like that trope.
I'm writing this stuff down.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm a fan of Terry's. Like, he was one of the first sci-fi books I found when I got the Kindle. So I'm unashamedly a super fan. And we argue online all the time. Like, we make fun of each other as like our day job. But that series is really good if you like that ancient warship brought back to life kind of thing out of mothballs. Yeah. It's that times 11.
Fantastic. So, yeah, I love that trope. It totally works. It worked in Battlestar Galactica, what I read.
Yeah, the Battlestar Galactica, they did it more on the reboot where they emphasized it was a museum ship.
Yeah.
And then, with the Cylon's tech abilities, that's why they had to go low key. Like, well, why would you use that? You have all this tech that exists now. Why aren't they using, which is basically updating the tech from, when that was made, certain things just weren't possible. So how are they going to account for it? They didn't know it existed, right? Nobody was thinking Wi-Fi back then.
Right. And so, isn't that funny? Yeah, you're exactly correct.
And so when they did the reboot, they gave a reason why they stuck with the old tech, because it couldn't be hacked. That makes perfect sense to me. I buy it.
I don't know the old. Have you watched? I've not watched the old Battlestar Galactica. I have a feeling it wouldn't hold up, but I don't know. I haven't watched it forever.
I don't know. So I bought a copy of it because I wanted to watch it, because that's been a thing I've been trying to do. I've been trying to go through some of the classics that I missed just to see like where we come from as a genre. And so I bought it off of Amazon, and the first one I bought, I had to send back because I didn't know anything about DVD zones as far as like formatting. I didn't realize that it'd be different if you're buying it in Europe versus America. And then they accepted it back because I didn't open the package when it said, whatever on the back. Now I know to look. And then I ordered it again. And this one, instead of it coming episodically, like breaking it down like the episodes airs, they just mashed it all together. So the first DVD had like however many episodes, one right after another, which if you're trying to watch it not in a 40-hour block where you just don't stop, it's very hard to track where you're at. Like, it's easy to say season 1, episode 5, not DVD 2 4-hour mark,
Oh, I see. Yeah, sure.
And so I'm told that that was a short run. They didn't do very many that way. It was actually a mistake. And so there are versions out there that I will get around to buying that have it broken by episode, because I do want to give it a shot. And I do like the pilot's uniforms, the way they did those. It didn't have that psychedelic 70s vibe that was popular back then. With all the shiny materials, it was kind of like, I don't know, it looked more realistic from a military perspective.
The original Battlestar Galactica?
Yeah, the original pilot's uniform they were wearing.
Okay.
It was kind of a less is more approach. I liked that.
You got a good memory. Okay, good for you.
I remember stuff that happened before the head injury. Stuff after I have to fight to remember. But that was just one of the ones that stood out. Like I said, you notice those little details, because if the outfit doesn't look realistic, it reminded me of the uniform they wore in The Last Starfighter, if you're familiar with that one, the movie.
Well, I watched the movie, but I don't remember the uniforms like you do.
It's just because I don't know, maybe because I grew up in a military town, I'm a military brat, joined the military myself. It's those kind of details matter. But like you have a movie with horses in it, none of that's going to catch my attention. But those horse lovers out there, they will send you the hate mail if you get it wrong.
Oh, yes,
You
I've
know,
heard. No offense
so
to that,
like
folks, but yeah,
not yet anyway.
yeah,
Space
not
horses
yet.
can be real. So I know I like that, like the attention to detail. I just felt believable because if the uniform's too out there and psychedelic and whatever, like, well, how is he going to wear that on a day-to-day basis? It's not practical.
If you get the science wrong in like a hard or even a soft science fiction novel, you're going to hear about that too.
That's why I write mine so far in the future that I can just basically my science is magic.
There you go. That's a good get out.
I jokingly say I'm a proud graduate of Handwavium University.
Good.
I will make a nod to the science, like I'll the Miguel Alcubierre drive is it's a theoretical engine created by a Mexican physicist, Miguel Alcubierre. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. Okay. He was a fan of Star Trek, and he wanted to see if the math would hold to make a star drive that could go warp speed, and that's where he came up with. And then people said, well, in order for that to work, it would need to make more energy. It would take more energy than the sun produces in its lifetime. And so other scientists came on from his proof and they added to it. And now it's even closer to realistic. So mathematically the drive works. So I'll throw that in there just as a nod, but.
Interesting. It's amazing. Back to the original Star Trek, the little communicators, they're handheld communicators, right? They got that very right. And like the tricorders. So they got a few things right back in those days.
They did. It's a weird combination of they kind of theorized where tech might go and they nailed it. And then the other part of that is some of what they did inspired actual young scientists coming up to say, I wonder if I could do that. And then they invented the thing up to 2011, I think it was, the 2010s. DARPA. Are you familiar with DARPA?
Yeah, sure.
So they did an X Prize, and one of the contests was to make a tricorder that could do the medical evaluation.
That's awesome.
And the guy actually invented it. Basically, he created a program. It was limited to the number of things it could diagnose. We're thinking mostly common ailments that you would see, at an ER that aren't that deep. Sure. But they made it work, which I thought was kind of cool. The translation earpieces that you see at the Federation meetings with all the different alien races, they've made one of those inspired by that movie.
They did a good job back in those days.
Yeah, I like some of the tech that they did. I don't have a problem with the world, just the lack of money and the not understanding human nature. And like I understand why, but that was I have mixed feelings about Star Trek because I like a lot of what they did. I'm told, and I haven't read them yet, but a lot of the novels were a lot more true to what you would expect of human nature in the books, where the humans acted like what we would expect humans to act like. It wasn't this too overly noble. And so I'm cool with that. I'm going to eventually get around to reading them.
Yeah, it's like the technology progresses faster than we think, and in some ways not nearly as fast as we think. Like with Star Trek, right? We got the tricorders, we got the communicators, but we're nowhere near, visiting, other planets or even getting out of our solar system. So anywho.
Yeah, that's the running joke is they got the Jetsons and like they promised me flying cars and robot butlers by now. Yeah, I kind of get that. That like, I don't know. Right now, I think tech-wise, the holdup largely is the battery, the ability to make batteries both compact and small enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm actually in the industry in my day job, so yeah, we hear a lot about batteries, and yeah, that's exactly. If they solve that, and if we get fusion energy, the world will change for the better.
Absolutely. The other thing that you have to factor in, which is why some of like the Tesla, the electric cars, like ignore the fact that the batteries are bad for the environment, that what's involved in mining the materials for it. Just assume that, because purpose of the discussion, we wave our magic wand and the tech is good. Even if that was true, the holdup is you don't have the infrastructure of charging stations like you do gas stations. So it's not just the tech, it's the back end support of the tech that has to develop too. Which I think is interesting kind of to see how that develops. But yeah, clean energy would change everything. They've actually got some of the mech suits, for instance, that they've designed, but they require to be plugged in the whole time.
A mech suit? Is that what you said? Like
yeah, the company in Japan developed it. They have a mech suit that works. It can move around, do like some karate kata, or maybe it's not karate. They could do some of the martial arts katas, but they just can't leave the length of their extension cord. You could see something like that initially working in a loader capacity, like on a dock or spaceship or whatever, which is where you see it in Aliens. The original suits they were wearing, those weren't combat suits. Those were modified, like, engineer equipment, which to me is the believable way for it to evolve. And they even had one where they designed one that had limited battery space. And the funny thing is to test the concept, the guy built one that essentially was toddler sized because, it's easier to build it smaller to test it out. And so when he was showing his final product, he had his toddler out there in the other mech, the prototype mech suit, and they were doing this karate move together. And so you basically had a mech suit for a toddler. And my former co-host, before he had to get a day job, Chris Weiner, he always would get like visually sick when you talk about the idea of a mech suit for a toddler because he's a dad too. I mean, could you imagine a temper tantrum when they're in a mech suit?
Yeah, so I have a daughter, and yes.
So it's crazy how close we are, but yet how far away we are from a lot of the tech we talk about.
Yeah, I fear we're a little closer than we think, and I can only hope our wisdom is going to evolve as quickly as the technology, because it scares me a little bit on how powerful technology already is and is going to be here in the near future.
What technology scares you the most? Is it the AI? That's for me.
No, AI. I think, we talked originally about these drones that you're talking about. So I think the combination of these technologies with AI and the robotics and the miniaturization is just going to make the industry of killing just very efficient. And I just, as I said, I just hope our social systems and we evolve as a species quick enough to avert what could be a really bad catastrophe. I mean, we've all seen it in the movies, and we'll see if that's in our future. I have an optimistic viewpoint, more of a Star Trek viewpoint, so I hope I'm wrong, but I think that technology is coming, and we see it all around us, and we'll see how we deal with it.
So, are you familiar with the YouTube channel Dust, which actually they film in your neck of the woods?
No.
So basically, it is independent movie makers, and they do short film because obviously that's cheaper. And technology has made it so they can produce. They have produced quality visuals that are on par with what Hollywood's doing, with plots that are infinitely better in short form content. And the reason I mentioned them is because they had a video. One of their topics was basically that concept is they had enemies of the state, and they had hunter-killer drones that were AI controlled. They would hunt these people down and just like shoot them in public. And then, of course, it's been out for a while, so I'm gonna spoil a little bit. They were sabotaging. The politicians had programmed it to hunt down like their competition, but the idea was that they were going to take out criminals before they can commit crime, like pre-crime almost. And it shows you the danger of combining war technology with drones with AI.
Yeah, like Minority Report, right? That movie too, predicting what's going on. No, I hear you. It's coming too. I don't think there's any stopping it.
That's kind of scary, but all right, we'll move on to something happier. One of the current changes coming up is we stop asking each other these important questions. So we're going to bring it back. What's your favorite dinosaur, sir?
I'm going for the old classic Tyrannosaurus. It's like a land shark, right? Everything is in service to its teeth and its jaw. So I can't get it. Like the Megalodon, that would be my favorite in the ocean, and the T-Rex. Close second, Stegosaurus, just because it's peaceful, just eating grass, trying to mind its own business.
I like the look of the Stegosaurus mostly. That's why it's my favorite, because it just looks cool.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So cool.
And the rule of cool has a value all of its own.
Yeah. And they can defend themselves against the Stegosaurus. I were the T-Rex. So I think the T-Rex would avoid those guys.
Yes. So the other important question that we have to go over, because we are affiliated with Coffee Brand Coffee. So because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
I won't get up in the morning without my 2 cups of coffee from Phil's Coffee, which is, I'm not sure if the international thing, but we got Phil's Coffee here in San Diego and kind of on the West Coast, and that's what gets me up in the morning every morning.
Is Phil's Coffee a coffee shop you go to, or is it a brand of coffee that you make at home?
It's a little of both. It's kind of like Starbucks, but it's much more when you actually go to the coffee shop, they have like couches and a comfortable, inviting environment that invites you to stay, and their coffee is delicious. So I'm a Phil's convert. My daughter got me into Phil's here locally.
Okay. I like the 8 o'clock blend. If I'm doing it, I also obviously like Coffee Brand Coffee. We were customers before we decided to see if they'd let us affiliate with them. But I do I like some of the smaller roasts, although some of them they haven't held up. Like one of the things that if anybody was in the military, they're familiar with green bean coffee, and they're just a coffee company, much like a Starbucks that's on a lot of military bases overseas. And I remember when I was in Iraq and would go there, and that was like Nirvana in a cup, best coffee I've ever had. And
What's
then I've got a buddy, a green bean, like the color green bean coffee.
Oh, green bean, okay.
And so like I've had a friend of mine who was like, yeah, I've been to one stateside and it's just not as good as we remember. So I don't know if they're just not as good as they used to be, or if the combination of almost dying and utter exhaustion just made it taste better, or maybe a little bit of both.
I'm just glad it was there for you.
Absolutely. And the funny thing was because they put themselves on a map, because they were cheap because the company, right? They want people to find them. They ended up inadvertently giving away the position of some of our bases, so they had to take it off. This was speaking of tech gone astray. That was the other thing, is when people were doing Pokemon, when that was the big craze, they were going into like classified places they weren't supposed to because they were chasing the Pokemon that didn't realize these were like out of limits. They ended up having to like block off sections on the globe and say, no, there's nothing here. It's a dead zone.
We didn't go on the military bases, but my daughter and I, when she was younger, when Pokemon first came out, yeah, we went all around town looking for Pokemon. It was a lot of fun.
I like the general concept because it got people who weren't otherwise active moving and walking and losing lots of weight, and they were having fun doing it. And so in that respect, I adored it. But like situational awareness, so like people would get hurt because they walked in front of traffic because they're staring at their little thing. But that one, and then the other one that they got in trouble for, with the Pokemon, at least if you remember, at some of the historic sites of World War I, like somebody was trying to chase Pokemon into Auschwitz, and they're like, that's disrespectful, don't do that.
I agree. Yeah. And by the way, thank you for your service, JR. You probably get that all the time.
You're welcome. Other than the IDs, I had a blast. The other one that they had that people don't think about is the GPS in like some of the smartwatches that you can, if you know to ping it, you can actually like track military patterns like of patrols and stuff because they're smartwatches. I remember when that was a big scare. I don't know how they fixed that either, because that was coming as I was getting out. But you don't think about some of the tech and the dangers of giving your position away, like something as simple and innocuous as your Garmin watch or your Fitbit or whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I work. Yeah. Anyways, I totally get it. The company I work for now, we are like always under attack by every nation state in the world. So it's something at least top of mind, I think, more now than it has been in the past.
I remember hearing about it as something to be concerned about when Obama was running for office the first time. And like I said, we're apolitical here, people, so don't read anything into this. But I remember that because he came from the corporate side, he was really big into the BlackBerry, which was popular on the corporate side.
I totally remember that. Yeah.
And everyone was concerned that somehow that was going to be a security risk. I don't know enough about tech to know why, but I remember like commentators on both sides of the aisle angsting over whether his BlackBerry was going to like lead to existential doom. And of course it's the news, so they play up all the insanity. But like, and I started thinking, so tech could give your position. Like, it would never occurred to me to even think about, because like I remember getting my first flip phone, and those things were dumb. Like they could only do so much.
Right. It's totally legit. I mean, I think all those things are totally valid. And if you can imagine it's happening, you should plan on it happening and take countermeasures.
That is actively why I use Apple phones instead of Android. They say whatever you use first is what's easier for you. Is because when I was going through the TBI clinic, at the time they were either giving you Apple Nano or Apple iPods or whatever, or the BlackBerry, because it was what they were giving you it for was it had the alarms, the reminders that integrated with the calendar. And so for people with memory issues, it could help you build routines and build habits. you basically are living OCD by the schedule. They don't give those out anymore because obviously everybody's smartphone will do that. But because that was going on with Obama at the time, they put a hold on all BlackBerry's options, so everyone was getting the Apple product. And I've just been using Apple ever since because that was the tech that they taught me how after all those classes. So it's crazy how that all works. And man, you're a lot of fun to talk to. I realize we're an hour in and we're just getting nerdy and we still haven't talked about the book.
Oh, is that right?
So before we start talking about Melody, which is your book with an amazing cover, I'm going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
Humanity will be free, no matter the cost. Deep in the Guatemalan jungle, buried beneath a forgotten Mayan pyramid, an earth-shattering secret sits, waiting. Its discovery will rip apart the illusion that humanity is alone in the universe. Engaged in a life-and-death struggle for the future of mankind, Harry Rogers and Jess Cook are forced to protect this secret from the most despicable foes imaginable. They must race across the globe to complete Liberty Station, the first true interplanetary ship. Only then can they search for the shocking truth behind what they found. They have no room for error, because failure means death for them and subjugation for everyone else. Presenting Liberty Station, Book 1 of Humanity Unlimited, written by Terry Mixon. Purchase your copy on Amazon and learn more about the author and his works at terrymixon.com.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So we obviously brought you here to talk about your book, Melody. So before we start getting into the nitty gritty, can you give us sort of the Reader's Digest version, the ad copy, elevator pitch, whatever you want to call it, about this story?
So I'll give you the official elevator pitch and then the unofficial kind of the pitch that I'll just tell my friends. Melody from the stars can save humanity, but only if Stephen can awaken the alien within. Childhood therapy cured Stephen Fisher of disturbing visions and the delusion of having come from another world. But when his daughter obsesses over a star in the night sky, he fears that his genetic legacy may have burdened her with the same illness. His sanity is then shattered when he loses his child and the military abducts him, claiming that she recorded a song from another world. A voice inside Stephen's head convinces him he can bring his daughter back to life. What he discovers instead is a stunning truth about himself, his child's destiny, and the fate of the entire human race.
Wow, that's a gut punch in the beginning, losing your kid.
Yeah, so I'm very light on that, and there's a surprise at the end. So so that's not, you'll find as you read the book that that's not all there is to it. So it's not as grim maybe as it seems. There's some humor in there, Max Mystery and some others. So I think it's a lighter tone, but that initial impression will not hold as you read the book. And if you're a parent, you may recognize your child in there because I've been a dad with a daughter right next door. And she comes to life in that book as Melody. So I just had a lovely time reading that and was really inspired by my own life and my own family.
So is this a standalone novel or is this going to be a part of a series?
So the sequel is done. I just finished it just last month, and it'll be released here in January. And that writing group that I told you about earlier has probably read it like 5 times. So I think it's finally ready for prime time. And once it gets out of the copy edit, the sequel will be released, I think January 1st.
Outstanding. So let's, before we dive in, let us talk about the cover. So it's definitely captivating with the eyes. They kind of jump out at you. I like when you zoom in, you can see the texture. So let me do that again for you. And obviously he's got his award winner sticker, but like you can see the texture of the grass or the ground, whatever that is. I kind of like that layered approach, the way you did that. Maybe because I'm colorblind, I focus on texture a lot more than most people because I see texture more. It's kind of a trade-off, I guess, from not seeing colors. But I really like the little details in this. So did you design this yourself or did you hire an artist?
So I did hire an artist. Is in New Zealand. You can find him at demonza.com. And this was years ago. I think Steve, your previous guest, used the same artist. That said, they got really tired of me because I just obsessed over the cover, and every little detail you see in there was definitely something I had some feedback on. So I really appreciate you like the cover, because I just absolutely love it. It's hanging on my wall over there. I love it so much.
I mean, I think, if nothing else, your first book. I'm assuming this is your first book, right?
Yeah, it's officially my second book, and nobody will ever see my first book, thankfully.
I'm a rarity. I published my first book. It just had a lot of edits.
Oh, good for you! Congratulations. Some people can do it. I just learned that that's a whole other story. But this is my first published book. I'll just leave it at
that. For me, it was more. I have written, like, it sounds like, oh, you haven't written anything, but I'd actually written a lot, like hundreds of thousands of words, because, I was a history major. It's nothing but writing papers. So I think it's not so much the first thing you publish, it's just the experience writing, I think, is what it comes to.
I used to write for what at one time was a pretty popular technical publication called Oracle Professional. I actually wrote a regular column, but it was very technical. And somehow in my first book, I said, hey, I can do this. And I love reading, and I thought I could write. And that first one didn't go well, but it was an invaluable experience, because I made every mistake you've ever heard of on that first book. And, I kind of climbed on the shoulders of that first book and applied a lot of those lessons to the second book, that I think it wouldn't have been the book it is without me kind of writing that disaster of a first novel.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference. That's one of the things that I had to sit down with an editor and go over, is like some of what we did, academic writing style, and academic writing is even different than technical writing. There's some overlap, but there's still a different style. Like, some of that just doesn't work. So like in history, like academic papers, it's not uncommon to see a paragraph or a sentence with a lot of commas and conjunctive clauses and whatnot. But you don't want that in fiction. I remember the first time my editor touched my book, they're like, yeah, no more than 2 commas a sentence. You're not allowed any more than that. And so it's a different beast. It's definitely a learning curve. But I think if you can write in general, like the concept of organizing your thoughts on paper and finishing that in the form of the final product, I think that goes a long way on the writing side.
Absolutely. And that technical background, it sounds like we both have, it really helped me, because this first book is hard science fiction. There's one, I'd say half the book is hard science fiction. It really kind of gets into the details. I can get into it if you care about it, but
yeah, sure.
So this book has 2 interweaving points of view. One is this guy, Stephen Fisher, who, and I may be giving away a little spoilerish stuff, but he thinks he is mentally ill. And he's a psychologist, and he's overcome, some of that trauma, a lot of the childhood trauma and such. You'll find out through the course of the book, he does not have a mental disorder. There's something else going on that is it's what the whole book's about. And his daughter, he believes, shares that. That is more of the kind of pseudoscience side, the hand-wavy side to an extent. However, the other half of the book is told through the perspective of the director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is just up the road where I live. Not up the road, it's up in LA. And the science there is, if you think, it's really kind of an updated Contact, Sagan's Contact for the 21st century, is everything that Dolores McCann, who's the director of JPL, does, is when they detect this extraterrestrial signal, it's, and you find this out pretty much in the first chapter with Dolores, or maybe the second chapter, they discover it through gravitational waves. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, or you just kind of casually keep track of what's going on, gravitational waves are created, or ripples in space-time that are created by the collision of massive celestial objects like neutron stars and black stars. And we have Earth-based detectors. They use something called the interferometer with lasers to detect these waves, that the amplitude of those waves are smaller than the nucleus of a helium atom. So it's just an amazing thing that we can detect. And it was originally theorized by Einstein back in the day. Anywho, this book and what Dolores is launching was based on a real project that is yet to be put into production, but it's a space-based laser interferometer called LISA that the European Space Agency has done. But anyways, those details aside, that's just one example of kind of the hard science fiction. It also gets into information technology about how an extraterrestrial race might actually communicate with us using information technology that would be embedded in the transmission. So anyways, there's a lot of hard science that I think is very real, at least all very real on the Dolores McCann side as the director of JPL. And I think readers will enjoy it because I think one thing that really inspired me as an author when I was writing this book, and what inspires me about reading books is I want to give the reader a sense that this could really happen in our world today. And that's what I aim for, and I hope I've achieved that. The science is pretty real, and even what's happening with Stephen, and I can't get into it because of spoilers, it's possible that's happening right now. And there's a lot of foundation for that I could get into it, but I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to bore your folks here. But kind of the sense I wanted to give when we finish this book is this could happen, and if it did happen, this is exactly how it would go down in our world.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I don't know. It's interesting to think about what that might look like. I think there's some that are doom and gloom, and some that have been jaded by TV, so they think it's going to go one way or another. I try to keep more of an open mind if we have first contact. I suspect the first alien life we'll meet will be microscopic in the form of just plants, flora, fauna, whatever that exists on a world before we meet anything sentient. But I do like that the idea that music might be the universal language.
Thank you. That's a theme that kind of goes through that. Absolutely. 100% agree with that.
And music is at its core math. And so it's not too far from the idea that math is the universal constant. But the trick for that is to assume that they have the same numeric structure we do of the 0 through 9 as the prime numbers and everything that happens after that. Or even the concept 0, because we had math before we had the concept of 0. Mm-hmm. I think the concept was developed simultaneously by Arabic scientists and Indian ones at the same time in 2 different locations. But that idea, it kind of revolutionized math at the time. What's to say that they have that as their base? Whereas music, we all have ears, presumably, and that might be a way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, right? So music, it is math-based. And, it's kind of interesting, and my book doesn't get so much into this, but music is the theme. That's how the extraterrestrial transmission is coming through. And that's not a spoiler. That comes through immediately. That's like, what is going on? And, that is what I think Carl Sagan said, mathematics is the universal language. So maybe, right? But music could be just kind of a piece of that. And the fact that, like my dog, God bless her, she... they really respond to that. So I think there is something really universal about music and about love and about how we all interact and interrelate.
And it can convey emotions in ways pure numbers can't.
100%, yeah. And I'll mention too, gravitational waves, and Carl Sagan would agree with this, that is the best way to handle extraterrestrial communication. So not subspace, but kind of going the speed of light. It just there's no barriers. There's nothing that can really deflect it's like ripples in a pond. You can kind of move it and deflect it, but nothing like light that can be easily deflected through gas clouds. Anyways, I'm getting too deep for you.
No, and that's it goes back to the idea is once you shoot it into space, it will just keep going. Absolutely. Until it hits something to stop it. So I'm picturing now the first intergalactic war is started by Elon Musk's little red sports car flying through space with the dummy in it. It crashes into someone and they're like, "Oh, this is war." Because nobody thinks about that in space when they talk about combat. Well, very few factor in if I fire a missile at you and miss, that still keeps going until it hits something. It might be 1,000 years from now when it hits something, but eventually it will.
Well, you mentioned something sparked the thought. Number one is This book, I find this book very hopeful at the end. I think it's inspirational, but it's kind of real world, so there's a lot of mix there. You mentioned something about life, right? Microscopic life. There's this physicist, astrophysicist, science communicator, Brian Cox, and I kind of a lot like, where is everybody, right? How come we're not hearing life? How come they haven't already visited? And he posits, and it's not through astrophysicists. He thinks through biology that when it comes to advanced life forms like ourselves that are technological, capable of technology, he's guessing, obviously. He says life may be common, kind of like you said, at the microscopic form, but life that is advanced and is capable of technological innovations like we are might be very rare. And he posits that there might be like one per galaxy. To me, that sounds very real. It sounds consistent with science. It sounds consistent with how kind of we have evolved on this world. And anyways, my book kind of gets into that too. In that world, how do you communicate with extraterrestrial beings, if it's even possible? So I have a whole theory about that and how that goes here, but I think that might be our reality too.
What you're describing, they call it the Fermi paradox.
That Fermi, right? Where is everybody? Absolutely.
And then the other part of that is, are we looking in the right way in the right spaces? So
yeah.
Obviously recently-ish, I mean, I don't remember, but it's been, post my deployment, they've actually found microscopic life living in the sulfur flats. So the idea that everything, sulfur flats, a Yellowstone. So the idea that everything has to be carbon-based, obviously we know that's not true, or that creature wouldn't be able to live in the sulfur flats. Mm-hmm. And then there was a story that I watched on the Discovery Channel, and it was about this. He was I think spelunker is what they call it. He does cave diving. And there was a cave that opened up in the Antarctic. And so he got a camera that was like a crazy amount of money. I think it was like $1 million at the time. And he was supposed to dive into this cave and just video what was there, because it was one of those things that had just opened up. And obviously at some point it would close back up again, to see what was under the ice shelf. And the one thing that saved his life is he brought down climbing stakes that they said, you don't need those. And ultimately, when the storm came while they were down, the climbing stakes are what allowed them to get up as quickly as possible, but stopping at intervals so they didn't get the bends, which is when you ascend or descend too fast.
Yeah, it used to be a dive for sure.
Yeah, and so when he got to the bottom, he found entombed in the ice shells of mollusks, and some of them were still living and crawling that shouldn't have been able to live that deep under that pressure in that environment. And so I think we've got life living in hostile environments. We would have previously said, that nothing can live there. And if you apply that, because it's true here, then it potentially would be true elsewhere. I think some of the planets we might have written off because they're not in the Goldilocks zone might still be potentials.
Oh, I 100% agree. Yeah, I'm like into pop astrophysicists, right? I don't know. But, there's like signs of there's chemical, I forget what it's, phosphine, I think it's called, they've detected in the upper atmosphere of Venus. And right now, our chemistry people say there's only one way we know of that can be created through life. So is that true? And in Mars, I'm very optimistic we'll actually find some microscopic life on Mars. I hope that's true. And then where did we come from? It's very possible that, life might have evolved on Mars and then kind of traveled here. So I totally agree about the microscopic life. And I really hope within our lifetimes, we'll actually get some answers to those most profound questions that I think could just really change the nature of how we think of life and existence in this universe.
And under the oceans of Europa is another belief. I mean, obviously, we suspect right now that, the belief is it's frozen, but now the suspicion maybe it's only frozen at the top, and there might be water underneath. And if that's the case, I mean, it's possible there are living organisms, there as well. The trick is going to be, in order to prove that the microscopic organism existed there, it either has to be so vastly different than anything here. Otherwise, how do you prove we didn't contaminate the soil or contaminate the subject by the virtue of being there?
Yeah, so I just happened to go to Jet Propulsion Laboratory a couple months ago with my wife and daughter, and we visited their clean room. And it's a probe that they're going to be sending to one of the moons of Saturn. I forget which. I think they're going to in October to look for life. And so you probably know this, right? That NASA is so aware of that contamination risk and whether we seeded it or not, right? And so they take really extreme measures that they explained during this tour. So You're exactly right. I think NASA is very well aware of that and trying to take care of that before they kind of go in there and see what's going on. And if you haven't been to JPL on this tour, it could be a life-changing experience for you. It's like one of the most amazing things I've done to go into that organization and see where we're at with the science and what the missions are looking forward to doing.
There's one on the East Coast as well, a Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the Hampton Roads area.
Okay.
And then if you go to any of the air and space museums that NASA has throughout the U.S., there's one in D.C., there's one in Hampton. I'm told there's one on the West Coast, but I don't remember where. Somebody told me once. But just looking at like some of because each one of those museums will have some of the original like capsules for Apollo or whatever. It's just fascinating to get to see. And then you look at how small those capsules were. And you're like, he lived in that for that long? Like, ooh, claustrophobia.
Just two minor things about my takeaways from JPL. Number one, I saw this is a huge probe that we're sending to Saturn. I mean, that thing's going to be in Saturn. I mean, I literally just saw it a month ago, and it's going to be going to Saturn. Fingers crossed. But the new rovers, and we literally saw them testing it. You think it's some fancy place? It's not. It looked like a sandbox from a kid's elementary school. They're using that drone technology you talked about earlier, like what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. They're applying that. So these rovers they're making are just really small, but they're going to send more. And anyway, that's what they were testing. Is the new version of rovers maybe a swarm of rovers that they would send over Mars in the near future?
So one of the things that came out of, one of the things that NASA has realized through the James Webb Telescope, and before that it was the Hubble Telescope, is the power of crowdsourcing groupthink data. And so they were to release some of these images. And so new stars were discovered just by amateur astronomers that were just staring at these things that NASA didn't have the man hours to spend hundreds of hours poring over. As part of that, they were looking for ways to make satellites small enough that they were cheaper to build, and also small enough that if they did lose their orbit and they hit the atmosphere, they would burn up so completely that it wasn't a risk on the ground, and you get rid of some of the concern of space debris, space garbage that's sort of causing an issue. And they actually had a bunch of, I think it was high school students, it might have been college students, that came up with the CubeSat, the Cube satellite that was kind of compact. And they started realizing that sometimes less is more, because you can get, one of them won't have as strong a sensor, but if you have smaller ones, now you have dozens of them, and together those sensors might be more than the one bigger one might have been, and you could sort of diversify as they spread out, I think, which gives them more capability. So I'm definitely interested to see where that goes. I have seen some of it. They had some of the simulators for the new rovers at the Air and Space Museum where you could actually get behind. I mean, like I said, it's a simulator, so you're essentially playing a video game, but you could kind of try to control the rovers. The takeaway I had from that one was if you tried to go too fast and you hit a bump, you went airborne, and without the stronger gravity, sometimes you didn't get back and you just float away. And then you get to they had one at the Hampton one, at least, where a couple of years ago you could actually fly the shuttle for landing. And that was like a running joke in my family with my two sons and the wife, was like whoever got closest to a proper landing got to pick where we did dinner as like a treat. We made a big production of it. I crashed in the water outside of Cape Canaveral. My son crashed on the runway, so he claims victory. I don't know. At least my landing was a little smoother, though. I don't know which matters, the explosion or the sort of glide into the water.
I would love to go to sleep and wake up in 10,000 years just to see kind of where all this stuff is leading us. Because I'm pretty I just think it's going to be wonderful where this stuff is all going to lead us.
Yeah, and I like some of what SpaceX is doing, Virgin Galactic is doing. I know we're supposed to be enemies with China, but they've got some innovations going. A lot of the European Union nations are banding together to come up with tech. And then the surprising one is India is now in the game when it comes to the space race. Yeah. And so I actually think like competition breeds progress. If you've ever I noticed this when I was in college doing the running thing. When I'd by myself, it didn't feel as bad to slow down and I'm tired. But whenever anybody was with me on the track, I couldn't stop because I couldn't let them beat me. And when you apply that to the arms race, which is why that happened, like great and mighty things can come of it. And so I like that it's not just space as a USA thing when you've got other nations involved. I think that everybody wins.
I love like the in the book and in Martian, right? Just how we collaborated with the Chinese to get a common goal, get Mark Watney off of Mars. that was just wonderful. I just love that optimism because, yeah, why do they have to be our enemy? It'd be wonderful if we can compete peacefully and really kind of drive innovation to take places we wouldn't otherwise be.
Plus, Mark Watney and The Martian from Andy Weir gave us the coolest line ever. I'm going to science the shit out of that. If you had told me someone would make science cool in my lifetime, I would have laughed you out of the room, right? But
suddenly, I've seen the movie 6 times.
Yeah, sometimes like he just made, and then the comment. I don't know if it's true his comment about space piracy in that book, but it was certainly cool to think about.
Yeah, he's very except for the wind on Mars, right? He admits he got that a little wrong, but he had to have some inciting incident. I will say just about Martian. When I was at JPL, I had a long talk with the guys afterwards after the tour. And by the way, I gave them copies of my book. They're very happy to have that because a lot happens at JPL. Anyways, they had a first screening of The Martian, and when there's some scene in the movie where they show up at the supposedly the headquarters of JPL, they all broke out laughing because you actually go to JPL, it's just like an old beat up college campus, so it's nothing like the show in the.
So, like I said, you've got to allow a little bit of room for discrepancies just because of the rule of cool.
I think so, but then again, we don't want people to think NASA has all that money, right? They're starved for money. So I was kind of like, show what the real thing looks like.
The other one is you see it in a lot of naval movies where like they're supposedly coming into Norfolk and there's mountains in the background, and I can tell you there are no mountains near Norfolk. I think Mount Frashmore is like the tallest landmass, and that's not very big. But yes,
Vancouver.
Yeah, I like that that they take a little bit of license, a little more hopeful because it kind of encourages going forward. So back to your novel, because we started talking about the things that inspired it. What would you say if we've got parents listening? What would you say the rating, if we use the movie theater rating, because that's easy for people to understand? What would you say this is rated? Like, what would you feel comfortable with as readers, as a dad yourself?
Oh, PG. There, you already kind of, there is going to be some grief. That's going to be family grief that isn't what you think at first, but that would give it the PG rating. But I don't think I use any cuss words. There might be a hell in there, but it's pretty mild. And there is some, one of my main characters, Steven, is dealing with some perceived mental disorders. So it really delves into that. And I treat it very respectfully. I've got some family history with that type of thing, and it just happens that in my writing group, Michelle, who's also a very accomplished writer, she's a professional psychologist, so she really provided me some expert guidance as I wrote this book to make sure I got this stuff right, and it was really sensitive to what are very real challenges in different families. So I'm going to stick with PG as a rating.
Okay, it's in addition to knowing the rating, because that matters as adults. If we're listening in the car, like, can I listen to this when the kid's in here with me? The other part of that is, what would you say as far as the ability of a young reader? Like, is it kind of middle school level verbiage, or are you using a lot of bigger words that they might not be ready for until high school? Like, as far as the young readers that might pick it up.
I think they'd totally dig it. So it depends on how old, right? I mean, I was reading supposedly adult novels, when I was 12 years old, like Dune, right? So I think a lot of young kids, I think they really read and comprehend at a much higher level than the vocabulary might allow. So I think it's very accessible. That's kind of my style too. I try to write very simply, but there are some complex thoughts that I think kids can really appreciate. And I'd say 12 or up, probably 16 or up for sure. And there is an audio version of this that you can listen to, and it's a professional actor out of New York named TJ Clark, who does an excellent job. So if you prefer video or audio for your kids or yourself, that's available too. Oh, and gosh, JR, I wanted to say too, it's a little late here, but if some of your viewers would like the audio, I've got a couple promo codes that I'm willing to give out. If somebody wants to email me, that would be my pleasure to give as a little gift for your audience.
So on his website, which will be linked in the show notes, he does have a contact me page, which will get directly to his email. So he'll be able to see it there, and then he could do first come, first serve. So is this an Amazon exclusive title, or did you take it wide?
I would love to take this wide, but the reality is for independent authors with one book right now going to two, it just wasn't, my goal it's not financial. It's really to kind of share the joy I had in writing this book. So it's really finding readers, which it really is connected with a lot of people, just to my absolute, I'm just flabbergasted by it. So it is exclusive, but it's not Amazon love, even though I got nothing against Amazon. It's just, I really wanted to tap into that community, that the Kindle Unlimited community, as well as the Amazon ecosystem, so I could not lose money while I'm publishing my first book. So I hope to go wide later as I have more books, but right now it's exclusive to Amazon.
And is it in Kindle Unlimited, or is it just for sale on Amazon?
No, Kindle Unlimited, absolutely. If you have a subscription like I do, you can get it for free. You can download it right now.
Just in case people didn't understand what Kindle Amazon exclusive meant, I mean, it was refers to the KU, but not everyone is in the business, so they don't always understand. So I try to be, speak as clearly as I can for the listeners that just want to enjoy good books.
And let me be clear with that, because that's such a kind of a constrictive word. The book is available wide because there's a company called Ingram Spark. It doesn't matter, but if you go to your independent bookstore, which people have, they've ordered my book. They typically won't carry it, but you can ask them to special order it, and it won't go. Amazon won't know anything about it. They'll go direct to Ingram, and Ingram is the same publisher that provides all the printed copies of any book, trad or independent. So that's definitely an option if you don't want to feed into the Amazon.
Absolutely. So that's the one thing most people don't realize. Amazon exclusive applies mostly to audiobooks and ebooks. It does not. They don't care about paperback.
Exactly.
I mean, to be honest, most people don't sell any of their. Most of the time, people are doing a paperback. It's only because someone wants an autographed copy for their bookshelf. Like, it's not the preferred reading method for most people anymore. So, so that's one of the things is even if even if you're exclusive into Kindle Unlimited for your ebook and you're exclusive on Audible because the percentages are better, you can still take the print copy wide, which is what we do. So I understand that that's a decent model, and I didn't even think to mention that.
Yeah, good.
So is Ingram Sparks the one that lets people get this into the library system, where if they want to request their library buy it?
Oh, I forgot. I did whatever I had to do to put it in because it's at my local library. Just so I can have a copy there. So it's definitely accessible, but I forgot the plumbing to make that happen. But whatever I had to do, I did to make sure libraries can order it.
Absolutely. All right. So if you want to get it in your local library and read it that route, that is an option. And libraries can also do the ebooks these days. Apparently, you can check those out too, which is and audio. Like I have to figure out how to use the program, but they were telling me when I was at the library with the kid the other day that you can check out audiobooks now, much like ebooks at the library.
Yeah,
I don't know what kind of program they use, but that's kind of cool.
That's fantastic. Back in the day, I used to get my DVDs. I listened to like old. Anyways, I used to listen to audiobooks all the time, mostly.
I remember when you would get audiobooks on cassette tapes and you would have to constantly switch them out. In fact, when I was going to colleges and I was touring to go to figure out what college I wanted to go to, and we were traveling, we would go to the Cracker Barrel and you'd check out an audiobook and you'd pay full price, and then they just reimburse you when you turned it in, like 75% of it. And so essentially you were renting it. The full price was in case you didn't bring it back. And so I listened to some cool books that were first on tape and then on CD when I was traveling around to visit what colleges I wanted to go to. And when people don't do that anymore. They just do the MP4, right? They just download, or no, MP3, they just download the file.
Oh yeah. I listen to audio all the time. Like as a judge for this contest, I mean, I couldn't do it without audio because I just can't, I don't read that fast.
Absolutely. You can get there's a lot of accessibility programs for the blind that if you have other issues like dyslexia or whatever, that will help convert. I mean, it's going to be a robotic voice, but they can still do audio for you if you need that.
I figured it out. I was able to, because these contestants, right, with the books, they give us a PDF and not all of them are on audio. And then I was able to put my PDF to my phone. I forget what this Kindle or not. Anyways, you could do it on the iPhone, and the voice was pretty good. It wasn't as robotic as I expected. It was a joy to do. So The lesson for me is you can convert any ebook into an audio format, but you just won't have a human narrator. You'll just get the AI.
Yeah. So I dig that. So how long is this novel? If they're looking to read it so they can kind of gauge the size.
It's 84,000 words, which is about 260 pages. If you're
so 8 to 10 hours on audio, roughly. Yeah. Okay.
It's this thick, and I write pretty concisely. I'm not like J.R. Tolkien. I don't tell you every blade of grass.
But damn it, we want to know what it looks like.
What's that?
But damn it, I just want to know what it looks like.
Hey, don't get me wrong. My favorite portion of Loader is when they're going through Holland. I loved all that detail. I just dig it. Same thing with Dune.
Yeah. So it's probably average standard size for indie books, about probably 8 to 10 hours roughly, depending on the speed of the narrator and audiobook. So, I mean, you definitely get your money's worth. What can you tell us about the main character? Obviously, like, we don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but like, what makes him stand out, you think, in the crowded field of hard sci-fi?
Well, so I have two main characters. So the first one, the director of JPL, she's a woman for one. She's got to deal with that, and she's just quite a character. She's really kind of the David to the Goliath, and the Goliath is going to be the social political landscape she's going to be dealing with as things evolve, as this book evolves. So that's kind of she really is just kind of a lone voice trying to fight the system there for a while. When it comes to Stephen, I think I've already alluded to it. He has quite a steep character arc. He starts out with some trauma, some childhood trauma, thinking that he's got some mental issues that have been dealt with, and he's dealing with his other patients, but he's still dealing with his own voice in his head, and the music that's always playing in the back of his head that he really writes off as something wrong with him. And so through the course of the book, and to me, one of the joys of writing this, I mean, I just absolutely love writing it. Even when I read my own book, and I tear up every single time. It's just as Stephen starts figuring out the truth about himself and his daughter, and trying to deal with all this while trying to stay married to his wife. And so all this kind of comes together at the end in hopefully a very surprising yet inevitable way that I know that I, as a reader, really love. And hopefully you'll have as much joy reading it as I did writing it.
Were there any secondary characters that stood out to you? I mean, if you have two main characters, sometimes maybe the secondary.
Oh, sure. So my dad's favorite character is Max Mystery. So he's a podcaster, and he's got a very popular show. And he really delves into conspiracy theories. But with Max, the conspiracies that he delves into, he's getting kind of close to what's actually really going on. And so Max is just a really fun character. Hopefully adds a little humor to it. My dad absolutely loved him. And then you'll find Megan. There's another character named Megan, who's Dolores's best friend. She's a character in and of herself. I just absolutely loved her. And it turned out she is going to be my main character in the second book. So the books are very much related. So you'll be seeing Stephen again in a very different way, and then you'll be seeing Megan, who was Dolores's best friend, and she'll be continuing into the second book.
Okay. Given what you did to your main characters, although it sounds like yours isn't as arduous as something like the Mill Sci-Fi or Extremes of Fantasy, if you met them in a dark alley and they knew that you were David Hoffer, the creator of their tournament, how do you see that interaction playing out? Are they going to kill you, or are they, just going to give you a stern lecture?
Well, Melody, who I didn't mention, she's definitely one of my favorite characters too. She's a child, and you'll meet her a little later in the book. She would run up and give me a big hug. Stephen Fisher would walk by me, maybe give me a little side eye, and just keep walking on. Dolores McCann and Megan would sit me down, and they would interrogate me about everything I know about their world. His wife, Stephen's wife, would slap me across the face as hard as she could. But I think in general, all the characters in the book Oh, Max Mystery would invite me for an interview on a show for sure. I would be the featured speaker on a show about the real man behind controlling everything in the world they think they're living in. But I think none of them would really blame me for a lot of what happens here. And there is some there's some serious stuff that's happening here, not only with the characters but worldwide. That I'll get into, because it just feels very real to me, and the feedback I've gotten from a lot of readers is this could happen, and so I don't think they blame me as the author for a lot of what's happening. They would just thank me for giving them a chance to live in this world, except for Fran. She'd be very upset.
Okay, so what does the role, because I noticed it stands out on the cover, the dome. What role does that play in the story? Could you tell us that without spoilers? Presumably it's a habitat on another planet?
Yeah, so no, you're on Earth for the most part. There's going to be at least 1 or 2 chapters where you're going to leave Earth. So you're on Earth, and I'll just tell you I'll explain the dome. It kind of goes in 3 parts, and I really looked at how Sagan did the original Contact, just to kind of give it a vibe, because I liked the vibe he had, kind of what was happening in the real world. The second part of the book is called The Machine. And so what you're seeing there is the machine. And that's going to be coming about due to the extraterrestrial transmission that's been transmitted to us through music, through the gravitational wave. So they're going to build something. And what they build is what you're seeing on the cover. And what you're seeing on the cover with those 3 people is Fran, Stephen, and Melody in the middle.
Okay. Are you familiar? I don't know if this plays in, but are you familiar with the dome habitat project that happened out in Arizona, where they built it? They did 2 of them, and then each one of them had a couple rotations go through it. Is that kind of inspiring some of your thinking?
So my dome's going to be very different from what's going on there. So it's that's just the very tip of it. A lot of it goes underground, but it is not a habitat. And
okay.
The reader is not going to learn really the function of the machine until the very end. And for the characters in the world, a large part of the conflict is, what the hell is this? And hey, here's some interesting technology we've not militarized before, which I know is a trope, but I think I do this in a very creative, real way that it really involves the characters, and kind of helps me as a reader and a writer think about how we're going to be dealing with some of these innovations in the future, and just how our society, how people, how individuals are going to be reacting to that.
Okay. And just because I mentioned it, the biodome, I think it was called the Biosphere, was the project, but basically the idea is they did it in the 90s and the 80s maybe. They built a dome that was supposed to simulate all of the terrain of Earth, the various ones, and basically see if people could live there in a simulated Earth while they were on something as inhabitable. I'm mispronouncing that word. Anyway, not livable as Mars. And we learned a lot, but overall the project was a failure. People went a little nuts.
That's disturbing, right? After Mark Watney with your buddies.
Yeah. There's some interesting books that came out of that about the people that lived there and, on the various trips, but I think it's called the Biodome or Biosphere. It's out in Arizona. It's worth looking into.
Interview to talk to on your show, to get one of those guys to come here.
I've actually reached out to the author that wrote the nonfic documentation sort of that event, that wrote a book on it, but none of them wrote me back. I think it's such a contentious thing that people drew sides that were involved, and it got weird. People are weird like that sometimes.
That just intrigued me. I'd like to know why it was weird.
There were people that wanted to stay and people that thought the project was broken, they should leave. They didn't count on the effect that the concrete taking so long to dry, because that's what people don't realize. Like, concrete does, if you do it thick enough, it takes a long time to dry. Like, some of the concrete that's in the Hoover Dam and that's been built for a while is still drying.
Oh my goodness. Oh, interesting.
Because it's so thick, and it's not like it's getting exposed to the heat of the earth, right? And so it was just, for some of it was personalities and some of it was just, science being science, and we didn't know what we didn't know back then. I do think we learned a lot from the failure, and I think in science, even failures are learning opportunities.
Right, 100%. Yeah, it sounds like it's a valuable experiment that we can build on.
And they were going to tear it down, and then a private company bought it, and they use it to test, I don't know, science. There's a documentary on Curiosity Stream if you're familiar with them. If you're not, dear listener, you should check it out. It's basically like Netflix, but for documentaries. They don't sponsor us, but I have a subscription. I love it. I watch stuff all the time. They've got history, science, animal kingdom stuff. Like if you've got an interest in something out there that's science related, they've got a documentary on it. There are other ones like Curiosity Stream that are out there now, but definitely something to check out if that's your jam, if you like documentaries. And that's like, I watch those for fun. So
fantastic. Oh God. Yeah. You're speaking my language. I would do that too. Absolutely.
And they do some pretty cool history ones. Like they did one called Blood and Iron about the Celts and the fall of the Druids. And like I said, I'm a history nerd, so they were speaking my language.
I love Bernard.
Absolutely. I love him. Harry Turtledove, some of SM Sterling stuff, who does time travel. Like I love all that. Sharp's Rifles.
Oh my God. Ryan, I've read everything he's ever written.
Yes.
Bernard Cornwell is Sharp's Rifle. Bernard
Cornwell did one on Master and Commander, which is also good. Cornwell did one on the Civil War too. It wasn't
one book I didn't love. I think but everything else was fantastic.
So in this one of the Civil War one, as a northern guy that was sent to VMI, and he ended up fighting in the Confederate Army because his dad sent one son to the north and one to the south. So no matter who won, his business interest was covered, which, is kind of cynical, but that did happen more than we like to think. But anyway, back to your book. So book one, obviously, the science in your book leads to a lot of interesting, like, rabbit trails you can run down if you're not careful. But obviously, book one, you said mostly happens on Earth. Is that going to be true for book two, do you think, without spoilers?
Yeah. So, God, I'd love to talk about the spoilers, but so book two is a direct continuation of book one. So, if you do read the book, and God bless you if you do, I really hope you enjoy it. You are after the last chapter of this book. The first chapter of the next book takes place hours afterwards. And
okay.
For reasons you'll understand very clearly, but it will be on Earth. Now, will it will take place on Earth. There is backstory that I won't get into that is taking place elsewhere, and I'm going to write a novella right after I finish the second book that is kind of the prequel of prequels to everything of Stephen's history and where he comes from. That definitely does not happen on Earth. So Stephen's been around for a very long time. Earth is just his latest stop, and he's encountered some trouble here. And so what's happening in the second book was always in my mind when I wrote the first book, though I never thought I would write the second book, because literally I just wanted to write a book my wife wouldn't hate. And I achieved that. This book did way. I'm still astounded and flabbergasted by the amount of people who found it and reached out to me. And that literally is the only reason I wrote the second book. But that second book, I knew what would happen in that second book, and I'm writing it because of just the readership and the people reaching out to me. Just really made it worth my while, because I'm really writing for the readers, and that's how I write and that's how I edit. Is really kind of keeping the readers in mind, really trying to make it a really good experience. So, direct continuation. You're not going to get off Earth in the second book, but that's only because I decided I would revise out all the stuff that would happen on what I call the long dead planet. So that's going to be a novella that's going to follow the second book probably within a year.
So obviously you have a tech background. You do tech writing as your main job.
Yep.
What level of tech background does a reader have to have in order to enjoy this book?
So none. So my wife's not even a sci-fi fan, and she doesn't know. She doesn't really follow the pop astrophysicists like I do, or the information technology stuff. So I really made an effort to make it absolutely accessible to everybody, so they really understand really complex, real technologies that are actually being planned and might be actually deployed here in 2030, to be totally understandable by teenagers, by adults. But that is not, by no means do I dumb that down. I just made a great effort to make this really accessible, and I had my writing group really kind of help that along as well, because we had some real non-technical people there. So the technology is real. It's fairly complex, but it is hopefully delivered in a way that's accessible and understandable, and really is driving the story along. It's not technical for technical sake. I'm not in love with technology. I'm kind of tired of it after 40 years, but it really is there to serve the story.
Okay. Was there anything else about Melody? Let me throw that cover back up for everybody. This book that you read, The First Contact Story. Is there anything about this story that we didn't ask that you think the readers ought to know?
Probably, honestly, JR, this is the first. I've done written interviews before, but this is the first live interview, so maybe. And if you get feedback from your readers, or if people want to contact me, let me know what they'll be interested. But there's a lot of reviews on Amazon. If you have any questions, or if you're kind of unsure, I'll just read a few of those, the bad ones and the good ones, to see if this is for you. I have found that it connects very strongly with some readers. Some, just like any book, some not. But for whatever reason, this really connects pretty strongly with folks, for I think sometimes very personal reasons. So that people have reached out to me kind of privately, and sometimes in the reviews. This kind of gets into the human experience and the human nature, and kind of what we're all about. Even though it's about aliens and extraterrestrial and technology and such, it kind of really goes to the core of what we are as human beings.
And since he mentioned reviews, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part and leave a review. Wherever you buy it, leave a review there. And if you're so inclined, write it for your website. Start a website just to review books. We don't care, but reviews matter, and we love to see them. So share your thoughts. Start a community. Kind of fun concept. I thought about asking you if you could live in this world, and I'm like, well, that doesn't work. This is our world, just with aliens. If you could meet an alien in real life, would you want to?
Oh, 100%. Whether it's a microorganism or an advanced technology, absolutely. I would absolutely love to meet an alien.
Yeah, that's the one thing that gets me on some sci-fi. I actually went down a rabbit hole where I wasted a year. Well, not wasted. I spent a year of my life diving into genetics, because you see a lot of the alien planets on like Trek and stuff, or Stargate, or whatever. It's like there's not enough people there to have genetic diversity enough that population lives. Like
right.
In a generation or two, they're all inbred and then they're dying out with no teeth. Obviously, some people speculate, well, if you have the science to ability to get to another planet, you've probably solved that, and you could fix that before it becomes a problem. But that's, a lot of times you'll see the cultures where, the people have devolved. So you got the Wild West planet or the ancient Rome planet or whatever. And so I've realized exactly like what level. I think the consensus ran anywhere from 500 to 5,000 is what your population you need. And I think probably more is better because, you don't want everyone to be related. So it's interesting to think about like some of the science behind all of this.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be real for us. If we ever do go to Mars, I don't know if we'll get there and actually try to colonize it. That type of thing's going to become a very real concern. We don't have to wait for extraterrestrials to start thinking about that type of stuff.
Absolutely. And if the first kid born on Mars isn't named Marvin, you are doing it wrong.
Marvin. Now
Martian.
Oh, who's the Marvin in Martian? I don't even know.
He's the little alien with the green hat that's always wanting to destroy things. He's got the little the laser that's like wanting to blow up planets.
Okay.
It's a cartoon.
Okay.
It's I don't know. I watched it as a kid. I actually thought that character was hilarious. So I think that would be my goal. I want to live long enough to see the Motel 6 open on the moon or on Mars.
Oh, same, absolutely. I'd love that. Hey, we're made from the elements in the universe, so there's definitely life out there. We just haven't detected it yet, but I'm hopeful we're gonna do that soon.
I think so. And I definitely think we're learning a lot from the James Webb Telescope as it's, more powerful than the Hubble telescope it replaced. A lot of cool things. And there is a few pretty good, if you want to learn about science, there are a few good YouTube channels that break the physics down in easily digestible kind of content. I think Sagan was the one you mentioned. There are a few others out there. I share some of the videos from time to time. So, and if you want some recommendations, send me an email and I'll send you my list that I use. But yeah, there's a lot of cool content explaining all that. So with that being said, David, where can listeners and readers find you? Since we know you're working on book 2 in the novella, that makes that question easy.
Well, davidhoffer.com, and then you'll find me on Twitter or X, and you'll find me all the links on Facebook and Threads. And right now, I'm really posting more about the contest and these 300 books that we're going to be viewing as judges. So that's the content you'll probably see in the near future. And of course, you're going to hear all about the book. And if you did like the first book, go onto my website, sign up for I haven't done a newsletter yet until I have a few books under my belt, but you'll be the first to know about the new book when it comes out, which I think is going to happen in January. I just want to avoid the election season. Going to happen once all that drawn. Yeah.
And you also have to allow time for the narrator to do the audiobook.
Oh yeah, and the audio, hopefully I'm going to time the audio when I publish it or shortly thereafter. So I've already talked to TJ Clark, who's the voice actor who's going to be doing this, and he's already lined up. He's just waiting for me to send him the book. So that's going to be pretty soon, if not at the same time that I post the paperback and the ebook.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things: the Bit Shoots, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, and the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans for Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. We have our website, which is over on podcaster.spotify.com. It's a bunch of gobbledygook since they bought out Anchor FM. But if you go to our Linktree, click the link, you can find our website. Pretty easy. And on that website, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and every penny counts, and we greatly appreciate your patronage. Or you can support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. Train left the station. I will keep them caffeinated until they can hear colors and see sound. How about that? There we go. That's the goal. So, and it will definitely be some of that coffee brand coffee. And if you use the link Podcast Grunts, click the link, and you use the code Podcast Grunts and click the link in the show notes, and you get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. I think that's a win-win proposition. It's an American company hiring American citizens, being built or being roasted in America. It is not a drop ship operation like some of these smaller coffee companies, which I like. I like supporting independent companies and small businesses. I think the corporations have enough money, and it's time to spread the wealth to the common folk. I know that is not a political statement. I just shop local where I can. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on, Dave. This was a lot of fun. We're definitely going to have to find some panels to get you back on.
Oh, I'd love to. JR, you're a pleasure to talk to. Really enjoyed it.
And when this gets out, we'll share the link, and hopefully people can find your book and fall in love all over again with a new literary sensation.
Fantastic. Really appreciate the time and what you're doing for the author and the reader community. Just really
absolutely. All right. And with that, we are out, people. You have a